The Northern Territory's Deputy Chief Minister has refused to say if he declared a conflict of interest in Cabinet over shares he held in a company that distributes alcohol in Central Australia. Calls are mounting for Chancey Paik to resign over the issue, but his leader is sticking by him.
Grey skies over Parliament as a cloud hangs over the Deputy Chief Minister.
He needs to go, Laura. This is another major controversy for this Northern Territory Labor government.
Chancey Paik is holding his ground after it was revealed he held shares in Metcash, a company that distributes liquor in Alice Springs. He bought the shares 2 months before Commonwealth intervention-era alcohol bans expired in Aboriginal town camps. Mr Paik argued strongly not to extend the bans under Northern Territory legislation.
The Deputy Chief Minister's position is absolutely untenable.
Mr Paik says he made all the relevant declarations regarding the shares before divesting them last December when he became Deputy Chief Minister. This comment from the Chief Minister has raised further questions.
So at any stage did Chancey Paik say, I've got a conflict of interest around the decision to lift the alcohol bans in Aboriginal town camps in Alice Springs?
No, I did not ever hear him say that.
The Ministerial Code of Conduct requires Cabinet members to declare any conflicts and exclude themselves from deliberations if they exist. Mr Paik won't say if this occurred.
It's a yes or no question. Did you disclose it to your Cabinet colleagues?
Katie, I'm not going to breach...
To their faces, did you disclose it?
I'm going to follow the law and not breach the Cabinet confidentiality processes that are in place, but I will say to you and everyone listening right now, that at no time was I in a decision-making position on alcohol policy.
If the government thought this storm was going to blow over quickly, it's been sadly mistaken. But the opposition says there's an easy way to clear things up.
You have the power to release the section of the Cabinet minutes that show whether your deputy informed the room of his conflict and how that conflict was managed. Will you show leadership and release the only source of truth?
We have never seen Cabinet documents being opened. They get opened after 30 years.
The Northern Territory election, meanwhile, will be held in just 6 months. Matt Cunningham, Sky News, Darwin.
Yeah, the electorate's not going to wait 30 years for that answer. Joining me live is the Shadow Indigenous Australians Minister, Jacinta Price. Thanks so much for your time. I mean, it's a bit of a joke to say that he's not going to breach Cabinet confidentiality on such a critical question.
Look, the Deputy Chief Minister's position is untenable. I mean, he's morally bankrupt. He's not being honest with Territorians, but Territorians are not silly. Evidently, he purchased those shares 2 months prior to arguing to lift the alcohol restrictions, knowingly that has a direct relationship to that decision-making and that level of argument to push to go ahead with the lifting of those alcohol bans. I mean, that created absolute destruction in our communities. And I can't believe just how disgraceful his actions and his behaviours are as he's now trying to hold on to his job.
Jacinta, it was only $600 worth of shares. It's not to be sneezed at, but it's not, a hugely significant amount. Do you really think that he bought these shares and argued for alcohol bans to be lifted just to line his own pockets?
Look, I don't care how much the shares cost, how much they were worth. It's the fact that he had a responsibility to the people of the Northern Territory, to our most marginalised, the fact that he should have declared his conflict of interest at the time when he was arguing for these bans to be lifted. I mean, if it didn't mean that much, why did he then divest them when he became the Deputy Chief Minister? What changed then for him to do that, aside from the fact that I believe he thought he could do it quietly without realisation after what had happened to Natasha Files?
I'll tell you what hasn't changed, and that is the plight of people living in Alice Springs. I'm talking about youth crime. I'm talking about alcohol in town camps. And you successfully argued against The Voice. We've now had 6 months since that was defeated, but nothing's changed in the lives of Indigenous Australians. So what's next?
What's next is that, well, we need those that are in power, that have the power to do something, to actually do something. I mean, we've got the Albanese government, who did not have any kind of backup plan whatsoever, who have decided to throw more money at the situation. I mean, the Prime Minister put forward and announced $250 million to support the crisis in Central Australia. We don't know where any of that money is working, if it's in fact working, if any of it has gone to any measures to better the situation on the ground. But very little seems to have been done. Nothing has been done in terms of supporting, of course, the school that takes care of our most marginalised kids, who are going to go ahead and try to find funds of their own to build the accommodation that's really critically required to support these kids that are on our streets late at night in an environment that they can be a lot more supported than what they currently are. I mean, child protection is a huge issue and it's failing in the Northern Territory. We can't have an ideological way of separating Indigenous kids and treating them differently and therefore leaving them in dysfunction. That should be changed. That should have been overhauled a long time ago.
Yeah, you talk about ideology. I mean, this whole sector is covered in ideology, and neither ideology or any of the ideologies that are kind of profit in this space have worked for decades. So what is the answer? I mean, I know we're still a little way from the election, but do you have a plan if you were to be in government?
Absolutely. What I've been calling for and what I continue to call for is an inquiry into the way that money is being spent. We have a massive Aboriginal industry that has been built on the backs of the misery of our most marginalised. We have a Closing the Gap report that comes out every year which reports failings. And I've always said we need to make our focus our most marginalised. Not every Aboriginal person is living in dysfunction and is marginalised, but the Closing the Gap process suggests that's the case. Our most marginalised exist where English is not a first language, where people are most remote, and that is where our efforts need to be placed, and looking after them on the basis that they are Australian citizens like everybody else, not different to everybody else because they are of a different racial heritage, being Indigenous. That's the ideology I'm talking about that we need to get away from, and we need to sort out the structures that already exist that are seemingly failing, particularly our most marginalised.
Jacinta, you've been at the front line, the coalface, for quite some time. I mean, I remember months ago when Matt Cunningham brought us some of the most awful stories out of Alice Springs. We had politicians from all sides descend on Alice Springs. Now, no one has been back there really other than Matt. What's going on?
Well, I mean, exactly. I mean, I had my aunt who had, my grandmother who had been beaten up in a community. We've supported her to move elsewhere where it's much safer than to remain in that particular community. I don't know where Marion Scrimgeour is. I've heard silence from her. Still, Yipperinya School are trying to do their best to support those kids, and I'm looking at other ways. I'll be bringing people, philanthropic type people, to visit the school early this year to look at ways that they can get that accommodation built. Looking at trying to sort out this situation with very little help from either the Territory Labor government or the federal government. The Prime Minister hasn't been back. I mean, he barely even really took a breath while he was in Alice Springs before he was gone again. He needs to spend more significant time on the ground to help these communities, and not just Alice Springs. The whole of the Northern Territory is suffering at the moment and really needs a lot more support. So does our police force. We need a lot more support than what we're getting.
Okay, Jacinta, thanks so much for your time as always.
Thanks, Laura.